In the security office back at the space station, Odo settled at his desk and gave his attention to his work, actively ignoring the little Ferengi, Quark, who sat fidgeting nearby. Odo disliked Ferengis. He believed very strongly in justice and honesty. It seemed a part of his being, like breathing or eating or shifting shape. He knew the Ferengi mocked such beliefs. But then, Odo also disliked everyone else, as a rule. Except Major Kira. She believed in total, blunt honesty. One always knew where one stood with Kira. He was not so sure what to make of this Sisko. He had seen how the Starfleet commander looked at him after the brief demonstration of his shape-shifting ability, and knew that Sisko wondered about his unfinished face, but hadn't asked. Odo wondered himself. 50 years ago, he had been discovered alone in an alien spacecraft near the Denorius asteroid belt. He had no memory whatsoever of his origin, of his people, but the Bajora took him as one of their own. To assimilate, he had been obliged to take on the form of a Bajoran. His true form, to which he returned each night, was that of a shapeless, gelatinous mass. He had never been able to get the humanoid appearance quite right. His features seemed flattened, two-dimensional. He knew only one thing of his people, that justice was so much a part of them as to be a racial memory. Odo could not conceive of doing any other work than security. He glanced up from his work as Sisko entered the room. Sisko said, "You wanted to see me?" Quark was on his feet, facing Sisko plaintively. "Commander, about my nephew." Well, well, Mr. Quark. It's good to see you're still here. Have a seat, please." Quark swiveled his large rectangular head to glance at the chair behind him, and crawled back into it reluctantly. "Of course I'm still here, Commander. We're not leaving until tomorrow." "I don't think so. It's really quite simple, Quark. You're not going to leave." Quark's mouth dropped, revealing a row of wide-set pointed teeth. "Not going to leave? But we're all packed and ready to... Why would you want me to stay?" Odo gave up all pretense of working and stared up at Sisko with surprised amusement. "I'm curious myself. The man is a gambler and a thief." "I am not a thief." Odo gazed steadily at Quark. "You are a thief." Quark smiled a sharp-toothed little smile that made Odo think of a hungry Bajoran sand dragon. "If I am, you haven't been able to prove it for 4 years." Sisko did not return the smile. "My officers, the Bajoran engineers, all their families depend on the shops and services of this promenade. But if people like you abandon it, this is going to become a ghost town. We need someone to step forward and say, 'I'm staying. I'm rebuilding.' We need a community leader. And it's going to be you, Quark." Quark glanced helplessly at Odo. "Me? A community leader?" Odo settled back in his chair and grinned. But Quark failed to appreciate the humor. He spread his clawed hands and shook his head at Sisko. "How could I possibly operate my establishment under Starfleet rules of conduct?" It was a good question. Odo turned to Sisko for the answer. "This is still a Bajoran station. We're not here to administrate. You run honest games, and you won't have any problems from me." Quark growled with disdain and folded his stubby arms in unconscious imitation of Sisko and fell silent. Sisko and Odo waited. At last, the Ferengi shook his head. "Commander, I've made a career out of knowing when to leave. This Bajoran provisional government is far too provisional for my taste. And when governments fall, people like me are lined up and shot." Sisko turned to leave, stopped, paused thoughtfully in the doorway. "Your poor nephew is about to spend the best years of his life in a Bajoran prison. The boy should be with his family." Not in a cold jail cell. Think about it. Inside the promenade, Major Kira shoveled rubble from the walkway into a nearby receptacle. Physical labor always freed her mind to roam, and now the previous night's dream returned, as it had been fighting to all day. The rational part of her mind was convinced that none of them belonged here on the Cardassian space station. Yet when she thought with her Pa, her life force that was nourished by the prophets, she knew otherwise. She had the same dream last night as she had been having for the past several nights. The dream about Sisko. Or perhaps she was only trying to convince herself it had been about Sisko. It had been about a man, a brown-skinned human with dark eyes and hair. A man who would become very important to her people. The Bajora needed help so desperately that many were claiming to have received knowledge that one would come to help, to bring hope. The stranger predicted by the prophets. But Kira was by nature a cynic, and now she feared her people's desperation, and her own, were clouding her judgment. And yet, when she thought with her Pa, not her mind, she could sense such amazing things in Sisko's Pa that she almost believed, almost dared hope. Sometimes she felt her mind housed two different people, the mystic and the skeptic, always at odds. No wonder her planet was in such a mess. If only Opaka, the spiritual leader of her people, would agree to see her. There were many things Kira wished to speak to her about. The sound of Sisko's voice made her start. She realized he was asking about the shovel, about whether such a task was appropriate for an officer. She shrugged, the dream and the Pa, once again reduced to irrelevance. Sisko was no longer the prophesied stranger, but a regulation-worshipping Starfleet type who irritated her. She straightened, emptied the full shovel into the receptacle. Everyone else is busy repairing the primary systems. I suppose Starfleet officers aren't used to getting their hands dirty. Sisko raised an eyebrow, located a nearby shovel, picked it up, and set to work. Kira turned her face from him and pretended to be unimpressed, but she found herself trusting him enough to mention her past, a privilege she had thus far reserved for Odo. In the refugee camps, we learned to do whatever needed to be done. It didn't matter who you were. They worked silently for a time, then Sisko turned to her. I was just talking to our good neighbor Quark. He's laying odds the Bajoran government's going to fall. Kira acknowledged with a nod. Quark knows a sure bet when he sees it. This government will be gone in a week. And so will you. So her common sense said. But hadn't her dream said otherwise? Sisko hurled a shovelful of trash. What happens to Bajor then? Civil war? Now that the Cardassians have ransacked the planet and gone, we'll start fighting in the ruins, destroying what little is left. Kira hesitated, wondering how much she should trust this stranger with. Dream or no dream. Commander, the only one who can prevent a civil war is Opaka, our spiritual leader. She's known as the Kai. Our religion is the only thing that holds my people together. If she would call for unity, they would listen. But she lives in seclusion and rarely sees anyone. Sisko considered this. Perhaps she might be more receptive if someone from the Federation asked to meet with her. Kira raised her face to him. You? Believe me, she has no more use for the Federation than I do. A shadow fell over both of them. Kira and Sisko glanced up, startled. For a moment, Ben Sisko thought he had fallen into the dream in which the omniscient Bajoran woman reached long, gentle fingers toward his cheek. But the face that hovered above him and Kira was male, older, familiar. The white-haired monk who had welcomed him to the Bajoran temple. Commander, it is time. The monk turned his robed back, trusting the human to follow, and began to purposefully stride over the promenade's wreckage. Sisko's heart beat faster. He stood, mesmerized, and for a second, no more, stared after the old monk. Odd emotions tugged at him, emotions he had thought long buried, emotions that had surfaced during the dream. Sisko knew he was going to talk to the Kai in order to help the Bajorans. He drew a breath, set down his shovel, and followed. Sisko and the monk transported planetside, where a bright midday sun shone on the ruins, scorched earth, dead and dying foliage, the burned-out shells of buildings. A few buildings had been spared. The monk led Sisko to one of them, a temple or monastery, Sisko guessed, from the elaborate stone carvings at the entryway. The massive stone structure's interior was dim, shadowed, illumined only by sunlight that streamed through cracks and holes in the walls. Sisko was shocked by the damage, the desecration. Windows had been smashed, interior walls knocked out, religious statuary beheaded. Yet the Cardassians had not succeeded in destroying the sense of serene contemplation that permeated the site. His guide led him past one monk who chanted mournfully amid the ruins, another who, hobbled by injuries, painstakingly patched an exterior wall. Commander Sisko. A gentle voice called his name. He turned in the direction of the sound toward the shadowed form of a woman. Sisko held his breath as a woman from his dream stepped forward, emerging from the darkness like the ghostly figures of the Saratoga's wounded. She was Bajoran, middle-aged, dressed in a brightly colored sheath, and she was injured. She supported herself on a cane as she moved toward him. Her face was badly bruised, yet it shone with an interior radiance, an inner peace that no enemy could violate. Opaka smiled faintly, gesturing with a gaze at the ruins surrounding them. I apologize for the conditions in which we greet you. Desecrating the center of our spiritual life was a way for the Cardassians to strike at the heart of the Bajoran people. Opaka led him to a contemplation area, where carved wooden benches formed a semicircle around a reflecting pool. She settled herself carefully onto one of the benches. Sisko sat beside her. She turned to him with a small smile. Your arrival has been greatly anticipated. Sisko forced himself to recover from the strange surge of emotion caused by the memory of the dream. I'm glad to hear that. If Bajor can join the Federation, it will bring stability. The Kai interrupted. I do not speak of the Federation. I speak of your arrival. Opaka reached out with long, gentle fingers and cupped one side of Sisko's face, studying him as an old woman might admire the face of a beloved grandchild. Have you explored your Pa, Commander? A Bajoran draws courage from his spiritual life. Our life force, our Pa, is replenished by the prophets. The radiance in her eyes grew as she moved her hand to Sisko's ear, and one finger slowly traced the outer rim. With a sudden move, she squeezed Sisko's earlobe. He jerked his head, startled at the intense pain. Breathe, Commander. He tried to return the conversation to political matters. Kai Opaka, if we could discuss your role in the post-Cardassian transition. Opaka ran her fingers back up the outer rim of Sisko's ear. Ironic. One who does not wish to be among us is to be the emissary. Sisko stiffened. Was his lack of interest, his desire to leave Deep Space Nine so obvious? The Kai leaned closer, studying each millimeter of his face. After a full minute of silence, she drew back. There is much to be learned from your Pach, Commander. Opaka removed a tiny control from the folds of her robe and touched it. The reflecting pool disappeared, revealing a carved stone stairwell leading downward. The pool had been a hologram. Sisko followed her down into a secret cavern, untouched by Cardassians, primitively illumined by rows of flickering candles. At the base of the stairs, Opaka turned to him, balancing her weight on the cane. You are correct that Bajor is in grave jeopardy, as grave as any time in our history. But it is the threat to our spiritual life that far outweighs any other. Perhaps, but I'm powerless unless I have a unified... Opaka cut him off. I cannot give you what you deny yourself. Look for solutions from within, Commander. At Sisko's puzzled expression, she limped across the stone floor to a carved ark. With a skillful touch, she removed the lid and stepped back so that Sisko could see. Suspended inside a force field, a shimmering double orb of pure, radiant energy floated. Opaka's face glowed green with reflected light as she stared down at it reverently. It looked like a revolving hourglass, or the mathematical symbol of infinity. Kai Opaka, what is it? Opaka had retreated from him and stood with her hand on a wall panel. The tear of the prophet. She pressed the panel. A passageway in the stone opened. She stepped inside. The passageway disappeared. Sisko turned, startled, ready to cry out her name. The cavern dimmed, then brightened with a strange greenish light. Sisko returned his gaze to the ark. The force field surrounding the glowing infinity orb had vanished. The orb itself had brightened, increased in size, started to spin. As Sisko stared in amazement, it began to spin faster, all the while growing larger, until the ark could no longer contain it. And then it spun out into the room, enveloping him with a force more powerful than a cyclone. The light brightened to blinding intensity, blotting out the sight of the ark, the cavern, everything except itself. Sisko cried out and closed his eyes, but still the light increased to a level beyond physical pain. And then faded. He opened his eyes, tentatively. No shadows, no cavern. Sisko stared out at a vast expanse of white sand framing blue water, blue sky, drew in a lungful of air and tasted brine. He stared down at himself and saw not a Starfleet uniform, but his own body, younger, leaner, wearing a bathing suit he had long ago forgotten owning. And standing there on the beach, he realized he was holding a tray of drinks in his hand. He nearly dropped it. It was lemonade. What the hell? Opaka? Two bathing suit-clad passerby shot him an odd look. Sisko fell silent, puzzled by the strange sense of familiarity. He was interrupted by the swift, certain conviction that his feet were being scalded by hot sand. Hologram or not, the sensation was all too real. Ah! 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 Sisko pranced on tiptoe, eyeing the area around him. The water was too distant, but he spied a nearby beach blanket. Sisko leapt for it, inadvertently kicking sand on the supine sunbather there. Hey! The woman rolled on her side, clutching an unfastened bra to her breasts, dark brows knit tightly above a pair of sunglasses. I'm sorry, it's just that the sand was burning my... At the sight of her face, he broke off and sank slowly to his knees. He had forgotten how utterly beautiful she had been. He stretched his free hand toward her. Jennifer? The woman recoiled, uncertain, as Sisko reached gently and removed the sunglasses. Jennifer's gold-flecked brown eyes squinted at him in the harsh light, without a glimmer of recognition. Yes? I'm sorry. Did we meet last night at George's party? He struggled to his feet, glasses sloshing lemonade onto the tray. Jennifer, wait a minute. This is impossible. What are you doing here? What am I doing here? Jennifer sat up, still clutching the bathing suit top. You really should wear a cap when you're out in the sun. Jennifer, I know this place. This is Gilgo Beach. Where we met, my feet were burning. Oh, do you understand how incredible this is? No, of course you don't. Oh, Jennifer. He stared at her, wanting to touch her, to explain everything to her, to tell her how tall Jake had grown in the last 3 years. She would not understand. She would think him insane. He cast about for something, anything to say. He shoved the tray at her. Have a lemonade. She drew back, mistrustful. Sorry, I don't accept drinks from strange men on the beach. But tell me the truth. Did we really meet before? Sisko studied her. How could he tell her the truth? About their marriage, their son, her death aboard the Saratoga. So he told the truth as it had been. That first meeting on Gilgo Beach. No, we've never met. She flashed him a big, shy Jennifer smile. So, how did you know my name? George told me. Then you were at the party last night. Late. I got there late, and you were just leaving. Are you going to tell me your name? Sisko allowed himself to slip into the conversation. Ben Sisko. I just graduated from Starfleet Academy. I'm waiting for my first posting. Jennifer's eyes narrowed. A junior officer. My mother warned me to watch out for junior officers. Sisko nearly laughed. Your mother's going to adore me. It's not every day you meet the girl you're going to marry. She stopped in her tracks, surf breaking around her ankles. Do you use this routine with a lot of women? No. Never before. And never again. How about letting me cook dinner for you tonight? My father was a gourmet chef. I'll make his famous aubergine stew. A flicker of uncertainty, of mistrust, crossed her features as she stared out at the horizon. I don't know. You're supposed to say yes. Behind them, above Jennifer's head, the air shimmered, filled with greenish light. The orb. Sisko's hope became tainted with grief. He would be forced to return to the empty present. The orb began to spin, filling the beach with light. Sisko began to reach for her, but the glowing force surrounded him. Jennifer, no. Wait! Jennifer, the sand, the water, disappeared in a blaze of green, brighter and more painful to Sisko's eyes than the explosion that had torn the Saratoga apart. He felt himself enveloped by the orb's mysterious energy. Then he was swept back into the present. Once again, he found himself in the dim candlelight cavern, Opaka beside him, as they stared down at the infinity orb, nestled safely inside the ark. His legs trembled, threatened to give out beneath him. Is it some sort of holographic device? Opaka's eyes shone with reflected light. No. What you experienced barely begins to reveal its powers. This orb appeared in the skies over 1,000 years ago. 8 others have been discovered since. They have been studied and documented for a millennium. Tradition says they were sent from the Celestial Temple. What they have taught us has shaped our theology. She closed the lid of the Ark, lifted it, and gently handed it to Sisko. I entrust this to you. It will lead you to the Celestial Temple, so that you may warn the prophets. Sisko eyed her skeptically. Warn them? About what? The Cardassians took the other 8 orbs. They will stop at nothing to decipher their powers, even if it means discovering where they came from. If they do, they might destroy the Celestial Temple itself, which could mean the spiritual disintegration of Bajor. Sisko shook his head, took a step backward. You expect me to go off on some sort of quest? Opaka leaned toward him. I cannot unite my people until I know that the prophets have been forewarned. You will seek them, not for Bajor, and not for the Federation, but for yourself, for your own Pah. It is, Commander, the journey you have always been destined to take. After securing the Bajoran Ark and its mysterious contents in the science lab, Sisko stepped inside his quarters, dark, save for starlight filtering through the portholes. He groped his way through the vast outer quarters into Jake's room. He knelt beside his sleeping son. The recent sight of Jennifer, 15 years younger, brought home the resemblance between the two resoundingly. Sisko gently untangled the blanket around the boy's feet and pulled it up to Jake's shoulders, then headed for the outer room. In the archway, his comm badge signaled. Kira to Sisko. Sorry to disturb you, Commander, but there's something on the promenade you might want to see. The lift opened to the strains of raucous alien music. Sisko took one step forward, stopped, and let a grin spread slowly over his features. On the darkened promenade, one kiosk shone like a beacon. Quark's Casino. Sisko ambled down the freshly swept walkway, watching the handful of pedestrians, a few Bajora, a few fellow shopkeepers, a few spacefarers from docked vessels, hurry toward their bright destination. Inside, the casino showed little signs of Cardassian devastation. A huge spinning vertical wheel, the Ferengi version of roulette, whirled under the guidance of Quark's Ferengi pit boss. Fortune's fate are with you today, friends. Prompt wagers, please. Sisko elbowed his way through the smoke-filled room, past crowded gaming tables into the bar. Quark appeared on the other side and offered up a snaggle-toothed smile. What'll you have, Commander? Sisko placed a hand on the polished bar and glanced approvingly over his shoulder at the crowd, then back at Quark. How's the local synth ale? Quark added new wrinkles to his already generously creased nose. You won't like it. I love the Bajorans. Such a deeply spiritual culture. But they make a dreadful ale. Don't ever trust an ale from a God-fearing people, or a Starfleet commander who has one of your relatives in jail. He slammed the glass on the bar in front of Sisko and wrinkled his brow ridge as he examined Sisko's face closely. Are you sure you have no Ferengi blood? Sisko permitted himself a small, even smile. All right, Quark. You kept your part of the bargain. Let's talk. Ben Sisko stood beside Major Kira as they waited at the airlock gate for the medical and science officers to come aboard. Sisko strained to pick out 2 blue Starfleet uniforms amid the sea of non-fleet civilians coming through the airlock gate. Sisko knew little about the medical officer, save that his name was Julian Bashir. He was absurdly young, fresh out of Starfleet Medical, and a specialist in multi-species medicine. But Ben Sisko and Science Officer Lieutenant Jadzia Dax were very old, very dear friends. In fact, Dax had been his mentor and fatherly advisor. They had not set eyes on each other since Dax, an aging, white-haired male, left Utopia Planitia. And Sisko had no idea what he looked like now. What she looked like. Sisko caught a glimpse of blue. Dax and Bashir headed toward them. Dr. Bashir, broad-shouldered, olive-skinned, with brown hair and warm brown eyes, looked every bit as young and green as his personnel record indicated, and then some. And Dax. Dax was definitely female, definitely beautiful, every bit as young as Bashir. She was long-limbed and tall, with a pale, delicate beauty that reminded Sisko of ancient daguerreotypes he had seen of Victorian-era women. At the sight of Sisko, she smiled a serene smile, uncannily like that of her predecessor. Sisko returned the smile awkwardly. Inwardly, he felt a strange sorrow. The outer Dax, the old man, was gone. A part of his friend had died, never to return. With Kira accompanying, Sisko strode toward the new officers. Dax fondly gazed at him with a young woman's eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of centuries. "Hello, Benjamin." Sisko allowed himself a smile at last. This is going to take some getting used to." "Don't be ridiculous. I'm still the same Dax." She had the what-the-hell directness of advanced age, but there was a bright, youthful energy in her voice. She directed her smile at Kira. "Jadzia Dax. And this is Dr. Julian Bashir." She gestured warmly toward the young man, as if the two were already fast friends. Bashir took Sisko's hand a little too eagerly, Sisko realized. This was Bashir's first assignment. Dax noticed the younger man's tension and took Bashir's arm with reassuring, maternal warmth. Sisko repressed a chuckle. Bashir obviously interpreted Dax's innocent parental concern as something entirely different. Kira's eyes narrowed slightly in disapproval. "Commander, if you'd like me to give them a tour of the station. You and Dr. Bashir go ahead. I'm afraid I have to put Lieutenant Dax right to work." Kira nodded and briskly gestured Bashir toward the promenade. Sisko waited until he and Dax reached an interior corridor, well out of Kira and Bashir's earshot before he raised the issue. "He's a little young for you, isn't he?" Dax did not quite smile, but she was clearly amused by the situation. "He's 27. I'm 28. 328, maybe. Did you tell him about that slug inside you?" Sisko could never quite bring himself to refer to the symbiont by its proper term. She looked at him fondly. "Yes, Benjamin. He knows I'm a Trill. He finds it fascinating. He's never met a joined species before. And it's we. You know that. You're speaking to both of us all the time. It's not like you're speaking just with the outer host. Symbionts have feelings, too. I wonder if he'd have been as fascinated if you still looked the same way you did the last time I saw you." "Perhaps not. I don't really know this new host. I miss Curzon." Dax laid a hand on Sisko's arm. "I know. I miss him too, Benjamin. If it makes you feel any better, a part of him, all his memories, will always be with me." They stepped aboard the lift and rode up in silence. In the laboratory, Sisko showed Dax the infinity-shaped orb, now freed from its arc and suspended behind a force field. She drew in a breath, her face illumined by childlike awe and reflected greenish light. "Benjamin, it's beautiful. Have you had a chance to test its properties?" He shifted uneasily, unable to bring himself to speak so soon of Jennifer and Gilgo Beach. "I've been waiting for my science officer. Your field, not mine. We do have one advantage. The Bajoran monks have been studying these things for 10,000 years. I've had our computers set up to interface with their historical databanks." She nodded approvingly, and he turned to go. She called after him. I was happy when I heard you'd accepted this assignment. I'd been worried about you. The words tugged at his emotions. Curzon had been worried about Sisko's stalled career, had nagged him constantly about transferring off Planitia. Sisko smiled sadly. It's good to see you too, old man. And he left before Dax could see the grief gathering in his eyes. Dax had faith Benjamin would quickly become accustomed to this new host, too. She rose and moved over to the nearby console. Computer, create a chronological database for all historical references to the orbs, plus all reports of any unexplained phenomena in Bajoran space. Initializing database. Requested function will require 2 hours to complete. In the commander's office, Ben Sisko surreptitiously watched a recorded transmission from Vesteris University. Sisko had made a half-hearted application less than a week ago. Now he watched the screen with nothing less than amazement. The Chancellor himself had delivered the news. It's not every day we have the chance to recruit someone with your experience, Ben. We hope you'll consider our offer seriously. I look forward to getting your response. Sisko stared dully at the screen. He should have been delighted, not oddly disappointed. Instead, he found himself thinking of Opaka and the Infinity Orb. He started as his comm badge signaled. Kira to Commander Sisko. The Cardassian warship has just entered Bajoran space. Sisko rose and stepped out onto his balcony and looked down on his command. On the screen, a huge Cardassian warship, dark and grim, glided toward the station. O'Brien, who was standing at the engineering station, turned to Sisko. Message coming in from their commander, Gul Dukat, requesting permission to come aboard, to greet us. Kira's eyes narrowed with recognition. Dukat used to be the Cardassian prefect of Bajor. O'Brien looked at his commander. Surely a coincidence that the Enterprise just left. Sisko glanced at his 2 officers. He had never met a Cardassian, but judging by the looks on Kira and O'Brien's faces, he hadn't missed out on much. Mr. O'Brien, tell Gul Dukat I look forward to meeting him. Not much later, Gul Dukat entered Sisko's office without knocking. His appearance was anything but pleasant, a collection of ridged, mottled flesh disappearing inside a black uniform that looked armor-brittle, like the hard outer shell of a dark, colorless insect. Dukat smiled, showing a narrow strip of teeth. He sat down without waiting for an invitation. Good day, Commander. Excuse my presumption, but this was my office only 2 weeks ago. Sisko rose, nodded, but did not smile. Gul Dukat, drop by any time you're feeling homesick. Dukat acknowledged Sisko with a humorless smile. You are very gracious. And allow me to assure you that we only want to be helpful in this difficult transition. You are far from the Federation fleet, alone in this remote outpost with poor defense systems. Your Cardassian neighbors will be quick to respond to any problems you might have. Sisko recognized the thinly veiled threat. With the Enterprise gone, the Cardassians could easily cause heavy damage to the station and leave the area long before Federation help could arrive. The Cardassian tilted his head quizzically. So, what did you think of Opaka? I understand you brought back one of the orbs. We thought we had them all. Perhaps we could have an exchange of information. Pool our resources. Dukat's abrupt change of subject caught Sisko off guard. I don't know anything about an orb. Dukat smiled in disbelief. We will be in close proximity, should you wish to reconsider my suggestion. In the meantime, I assume you have no objection to my men enjoying the hospitality of the promenade? He bowed stiffly from the shoulders and left. Sisko sank into his chair with a sigh. Some instinct had said that Dukat must not get the orb no matter what the cost. But Sisko's rational mind knew that cost might be the lives of those on the station. Was he letting Opaka's mysticism lead him into making a deadly mistake? He rose and headed to see Dax. When he reached the lab and entered, he saw Dax frowning at a monitor. It was strange to see his old friend suddenly metamorphosed into such a beautiful young woman. Even so, he was glad to have her here. Dax spoke to him without taking her gaze off the screen. "Benjamin, what do you know about the Denorius asteroid belt?" Sisko stopped in his tracks and blinked. "Your basic navigational hazard. Nobody gets anywhere near it unless they have to." Dax nodded and scanned the screen. In the latter part of the 22nd century, a ship carrying Kai Toluno was disabled for several days in the Denorius belt, where he claims to have had a vision. Sisko walked up behind her to put a hand on the back of her chair and stared over her shoulder at the data scrolling by on the monitor. Let me guess. He saw the celestial temple of the prophets. Not quite. But he did say the heavens opened up and nearly swallowed his ship. Sisko sighed. At the moment, his mystical encounter with Opaka and the orb seemed meaningless, distant, in the face of Gul Dukat's very real threat. "Dax, are we reduced to chasing metaphors to solve this?" She swiveled in the chair and rose, smiling at him. As a matter of fact, Kai Toluno was not a man prone to exaggeration. Sisko raised a brow, repressed a smile. "I suppose you knew him." "Just an acquaintance. I was a diplomatic apprentice at the time." Sisko interrupted. "You really think his vision has anything to do with this?" "Perhaps. I've been able to confirm that at least 5 of the orbs were found in the Denorius belt. There have also been 23 navigational reports over the years of unusually severe neutrino disturbances in the same area. And 32 years ago, a vessel of unknown origin appeared there, carrying a new life form, an infant shapeshifter." Sisko turned his head sharply to look at her. "A shapeshifter? There's a shapeshifter right here on DS9, the security officer." Dax took in this information thoughtfully. "I've been trying to correlate all these reports in one analysis grid." She pressed another control. Sisko leaned forward to study the 3-dimensional grid that appeared on the screen, brightly delineating a small area of space near the station. Dax nearly smiled. "Our celestial temple?" Sisko rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "It's worth a look. I just spoke with Gul Dukat. He's made it very clear he's keeping an eye on us. So, somehow, we need to get by the Cardassians undetected." Dax smiled up at him. "What were you just saying about that security officer?"